Imagine being on a deserted road, surrounded by darkness, and suddenly realizing you're not alone. What seemed like a peaceful trip turns into a terrifying nightmare when you encounter a mysterious figure who seems to know exactly where you are. But who is he? And what does he want? Get ready to discover what happens when you get lost on Route 66 and never manage to leave. Route 66 was much more than just a road. It was a legend, a link between the past and the present, laden with stories of progress, tragedy, and mystery. However, for those who dared to travel its long, desolate stretches, there was something more. A presence. Something that old travelers only whispered about, afraid to attract its attention. Sam, Emma, Josh, and Liz were longtime friends, all fascinated by horror stories. They decided to travel Route 66 during their summer vacation, not just for the adventure, but also to investigate one of the greatest mysteries surrounding the road. The man of the road. The legend said he appeared when least expected, by the roadside, wearing an old suit and holding a suitcase that seemed to hold dark secrets. The friends planned to document the trip for a horror channel Sam maintained. "This is going to be a hit," he said, checking the camera on the passenger seat. Liz, always the skeptic, laughed. "The only scary thing about this trip will be the state of the motels we'll be staying in." On the first night, they left Chicago heading for Oklahoma. The atmosphere was lively. They joked, played loud music, and talked about the places they planned to visit. But as the road stretched out before them, the excitement began to give way to silence. The horizon seemed to repeat itself, with the same starry sky and endless shadows of trees and poles along the highway. It was Emma who first noticed something strange. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The others looked out the window but saw nothing but darkness. "I thought I saw a man standing near the last gas station," she explained. Josh, who was driving, shrugged. "Probably someone waiting for help. You know how these roads can be." Shortly after, the atmosphere began to change. The temperature inside the car seemed to drop, even though the air conditioning was off. Liz pulled her jacket tighter around herself and commented, "It's getting cold all of a sudden." Sam, trying to keep the mood light, replied, "Maybe it's the ghost of the man of the road breathing on your neck." Everyone laughed, but the laughter was short and uneasy. An hour later, they were on a particularly isolated stretch of Route 66. No car had passed them since they left the gas station. The car's headlights cut through the darkness, revealing only the empty road ahead. Then the radio, which had been off, began emitting a low noise, like static. "What the hell?" muttered Josh, turning the knobs, but the sound didn't go away. On the contrary, it seemed to grow, turning into something that sounded like whispers. Emma covered her ears. "Turn that off now." Josh turned off the radio, but the sound continued, echoing inside the car. Liz began to tremble. "This isn't normal." Suddenly, Sam pointed to the road ahead. "Look, there he is." In the middle of the lane, illuminated by the headlights, stood a man. He wore a black suit, impeccable despite the dust around him. An old suitcase hung from his left hand, while his head was slightly tilted, as if observing the friends through the glass. Josh slammed on the brakes, and the car stopped just a few feet from the man. For a moment, no one moved. The stranger didn't react or blink. His eyes, almost impossible to see in the darkness, looked like two bottomless pits. "This is insane," Liz murmured, grabbing Emma's arm. "Let's turn around and get out of here." But before Josh could shift into reverse, the man took a step forward, then another. He walked calmly, but there was something deeply unsettling about his posture, as if every movement was meticulously calculated. Josh tried to shift gears, but the car stalled. He turned the key frantically, but the engine didn't respond. Sam, still holding the camera, began recording, his breathing heavy and audible through the microphone. "This is insane," he whispered. The man stopped beside the driver's window. His suitcase seemed to emit a faint sound of thumping, as if something inside it was moving. He didn't speak, but his presence filled the car with an invisible pressure. Josh, with trembling hands, tried to start the car again. Then, the man bent down to the level of the window. Now the friends could see his face. It wasn't a human face. It was something twisted, as if the skin was being pulled back by invisible forces, revealing impossibly white teeth and eyes that seemed to glow with a malevolent light. Emma screamed. Liz began to cry. Sam dropped the camera, and the silence was broken only by the screams inside the car. And suddenly, as if part of a nightmare, the man disappeared. The car's engine roared back to life, and Josh accelerated, leaving that stretch of road behind. But the feeling that something was watching them didn't go away. They were still on Route 66, and the journey had only just begun. The tension in the car was still palpable as Josh sped down the deserted road. No one said a word, but they all felt that what they had just experienced was more than just a coincidence or a collective hallucination. The silence was interrupted only by the sound of the tires on the road and Emma's heavy breathing as she still clutched Liz's arm tightly. "We need to stop," Josh finally said, breaking the silence. His voice trembled, and beads of sweat ran down the side of his face. "We can't keep going like this. I need a break." Sam glanced at the rearview mirror and then at the road ahead. "Stop where? There's nothing out here. Not even a phone signal." Emma, still trembling, finally spoke. "What if he comes back? What if he never left?" Her voice was a whisper, but the fear behind it was enough to make Liz shrink further into the back seat. Josh didn't reply. He saw a small rest area up ahead, dimly lit by a flickering light. It was a makeshift spot, just a worn-out wooden bench and a rusty trash can. He pulled over there but kept the engine running, as if he needed an escape route at any moment. As soon as they got out of the car, the silence of the night became deafening. There was no wind, no sound of insects or animals. It was as if the world had stopped breathing. Liz looked around, her eyes wide with fear. "This isn't right. Something's wrong here." Sam grabbed his camera and started recording, his need to document the unexplainable fighting against the terror he felt. "This is insane," he muttered, focusing the camera on the dark horizon. "But no one's going to believe us if we don't have proof." Josh stood by the car, staring down the road. "He can't be real. It was a trick. We're just tired, that's all." He repeated the words as if trying to convince himself. Emma, on the other hand, felt something different. Oh wait, it was as if the man's presence was still there, invisible but overwhelming. She slowly turned and looked at Sam's suitcase sitting on the car's back seat. For some reason, she felt an inexplicable pull toward it. "There's something in the suitcase," she said suddenly, her voice filled with certainty. Liz looked at her, confused. "What are you talking about?" "It's just a suitcase with our stuff," but Emma didn't reply. She opened the car door and grabbed Sam's suitcase, her hands shaking. When she opened it, a sound like a soft sigh echoed through the area. Inside, there were only clothes and recording equipment, but in the middle of them, a strange object caught her attention. It was a small black and white photo of a man dressed in the same suit they had seen on the road. He was standing next to an old car, his expression blank, but his eyes seemed to follow Emma as she stared at the image. "Where did this come from?" Sam asked, taking the photo from her hand. He looked at Liz and Josh, but both denied knowing where it could have come from. Liz began to panic. "I don't like this. First, he shows up, and now this? Let's get out of here. Now." Suddenly, a muffled sound came from the darkness. It was a thumping noise, like someone walking down the road, but the steps were slow and deliberate. Everyone froze, and Sam instinctively pointed his camera toward the direction of the sound. The dim light from the rest area barely illuminated a few feet ahead, but at the edge of the glow, the steps stopped. Something was there, standing just out of clear view. Sam adjusted the camera's zoom, his hands shaking. "I see something," he murmured. Then, the car's headlights flickered and went out, plunging the area into complete darkness. Liz screamed, and Emma grabbed her arm tightly while Josh ran back to the car, trying to start the engine. Sam's voice trembled as he whispered, "He's coming." And he was. The figure began to move toward them, its face still hidden in the shadows, but the sound of its steps was unmistakable. With every step, the air around them seemed to grow heavier, as if something invisible was draining all the energy from the area. Finally, the headlights came back on, illuminating the figure for a fraction of a second. It wasn't human. Its skin was pale and stretched. Its eyes were dark voids, and a wide, unnatural grin split its face. Josh managed to start the car and shouted, "Get in, now!" They all scrambled into the car, and Josh sped off, leaving that cursed place behind. But as they glanced in the rearview mirror, they saw that the figure was still there, standing in the same spot, with the suitcase at its side, watching them. The feeling of relief was short-lived. They knew it wasn't over. Something was with them, invisible but present. And no matter how far they ran, they couldn't escape. They were silent, but panic still consumed them. The car, now speeding down the empty road, seemed to be moving on its own, as if guiding them toward a destination no one wanted to reach. The image of the figure standing on the road was still fresh in each of their minds. Emma couldn't stop thinking about the empty expression, the way its eyes seemed to pierce through her soul. He can't be following us," Josh said, his voice low and trembling. Sam looked behind, into the darkness swallowing the road behind them, but nothing was visible. "I don't know, man. I don't know, but something feels wrong. That thing isn't normal." Liz was pale, almost speechless, her hand pressed against the car window, as if expecting it to protect her from whatever might be lurking in the shadows. With every turn in the road, she felt more watched, more uncomfortable. The sound of the tires on the road seemed louder than ever. The atmosphere was heavy, laden with a sense of impending disaster. Sam, as always, held his camera, but he no longer cared about recording. His gaze was fixed on the road, on the faint lights ahead, trying to find any sign of life. But there was nothing but vast emptiness. Emma turned to Sam and, with an expression of pure anguish, asked, "What do you think is happening?" "That man, he's real, Sam. He wasn't just a hallucination, right?" Sam looked at her, unsure how to respond. He had thought the same thing. Every fiber of his being told him there was something much darker at play. But how to explain it? How to justify what they had all seen with their own eyes? "I don't know, but something's not right. We need to find out what's going on," Sam said, trying to make sense of what was happening. But the truth was, no one there knew. They were just moving forward, like puppets on an endless road, being pulled towards something they couldn't control. Minutes passed like hours. The road ahead seemed endless, and the feeling of being followed didn't let up. Emma looked outside, and for a moment, she thought she saw something in the distance, a silhouette in the darkness. Her eyes widened, and she screamed, "He's there again!" They all looked ahead, but nothing was there. Just the road and the abyss of night. "Emma, you need to calm down. You're seeing things," Josh tried to reassure her, but the agitation in his voice betrayed the fear he also felt. But Emma didn't calm down. She had the feeling that something was following them, something more than just a presence, something that was getting closer with every passing moment. She looked at the others and, with a tone of desperation, said, "I know what I saw. He's hunting us." Silence took over the car once again, but now it felt even more oppressive, heavier than before. The road ahead seemed to stretch on infinitely, and the feeling that there was no escape only grew. They were trapped in an invisible web, and time seemed to be running out. Amid the growing tension, the car's radio, which had been silent up to that point, began emitting strange static. An old, disconnected tune began to play, something that seemed to have been pulled straight from a nightmare. It was a distorted sound, the notes blending with the static, creating a deep sense of discomfort. "Turn it off," Liz screamed. But when Josh reached to turn it off, the radio simply stopped. This isn't possible," Josh whispered, his voice faltering. In their hearts, they all knew that this wasn't normal. It wasn't just a mechanical failure. It was more. They were being watched, and whatever it was getting closer. The car kept speeding down the deserted road, but the fear consuming the four friends seemed to be becoming more unbearable with each passing moment. They were still on the same road, but now the environment felt different. The tension was palpable, as if invisible walls were closing in around them, pressing them harder with every moment. The feeling of being followed did not fade. On the contrary, it grew stronger. Something was lurking, something that was not human. Sam looked into the rearview mirror, trying to find some sign of what they were facing, but the mirror only reflected the empty road, lifeless. He turned his head to the side, and for a moment, the headlights illuminated something at the edge of the road. A shadow moved with supernatural agility, but as soon as he blinked, it disappeared. "He's behind us," Sam muttered, trying to stay calm, but his voice betrayed the fear taking over him. Emma was almost in a trance, her eyes fixed on the front seat. She felt as if the presence of that man, or rather, that thing, was becoming stronger, more present. There was no longer any doubt in her mind. He wasn't a hallucination, and worse, he wasn't alone. Whatever it was, it seemed to have a power beyond anything they could imagine. Suddenly, the radio, which had failed earlier, started to emit static again. But this time it wasn't distorted music. It was a voice, low, drawn out, as if speaking directly in their ears. The words were almost incomprehensible, but what could be understood made their hearts freeze. "You won't leave here, ever," Liz started screaming, but her voice was drowned out by the increasing static that consumed the car. "Turn it off. Turn it off now." But Josh, with wide eyes and heavy breathing, couldn't control the situation anymore. The voice's words made the reality around them seem to warp, as if the world they knew was being devoured by darkness. They were in a nightmare. Sam, still holding the camera, tried to record everything, as if that somehow would help, as if the footage he was capturing could be the key to understanding what was happening. But deep down, he knew that none of it would make sense when the horror finally caught up to them. Then Emma, in an impulsive move, pointed out the window. "Look!" she screamed. But her voice was hoarse, as if she was already lost, as if something was draining her strength. There, in the darkness of the road, something was moving. It was a shape, tall and disproportionate, with long shadows stretching out to the sides. It looked like a human figure, but its form was distorted, and its movements were far from natural. It wasn't running, but it was getting closer with a speed that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Liz looked back and saw their car being followed, not by another vehicle, but by an invisible force. The vision was clear and horrifying. The figure was with them, every twist and turn of the road, as if the car was being pulled backward. Not knowing what to do, Josh sped up, but the faster he went, the longer the road seemed to stretch, as if it were a spiral that led nowhere. "We're trapped," Sam screamed. He looked at the camera in his hands, but something was wrong. The screen was distorted, only showing disconnected images and shadows that seemed to stretch and twist. There were no more recordings of what was happening. Then, suddenly, the car was jerked toward the edge of the road. The steering wheel seemed to have a life of its own, becoming impossible to control. Emma, desperate, screamed as the car slid toward the void, falling into an endless abyss. But the moment the car touched the ground, it stopped abruptly. The darkness engulfed them, and the sound of rain, which they hadn't noticed before, began to tap against the windows. Silence took over the car, but it wasn't an ordinary silence. It was a suffocating stillness. Something was waiting outside, watching them closely. Emma, looking out the window, saw the figure once again standing at the edge of the road. It didn't move, only watched them with those deep, hollow eyes. "We can't escape anymore," Emma said, her voice broken. "He's got us." And with one final sigh, they understood that they were doomed. The darkness had consumed everything, and the only thing left was the end.